Andreas, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, you're a movement specialist. You coach people through exercise, through lifestyle optimization. And I've seen your content online or on social media, and you've got some really interesting videos and ways of coaching people through what looks like to be very circadian appropriate exercise routines. So, I'm really interested in talking to you about this. So, maybe we'll start with how you got into exercising and coaching people from a lifestyle point of view, but with this circadian background.
hmm So, a little bit about, in general, based on my background, where I lived before. I used to live in Finland for a couple of years, for around 3 years. And before that, I lived in Scotland, which was quite dark and gray. So the amount of light is quite less. But we didn't have much awareness about circadian rhythms and circadian health. So I wasn't taking care of those things. When I moved to Finland, I realized that the seasonal depression kicked in, and I started to realize that, okay, I need to do something about this. But it wasn't only the depression aspect and the anxious aspect, but because they're kind of interrelated, anxiety and depression. It was also like physical symptoms I started to feel. I started to feel like lack of energy, lack of drive. My workouts started to suck, and I wasn't recovering as well. I wasn't sleeping or feeling tired when it was time to go to bed. So I realized that there is something missing that I need to address, because I thought, okay, I'm exercising right, I'm eating the right foods, and I'm going to bed on time. So basically, I'm trying to aim for 8 hours sleep, but I wasn't blocking the blue light. I wasn't mitigating the EMFs. I was always training in a blue lit gym with lots of electromagnetic fields around me. I was rarely outside because, when the weather is quite cold, it kind of puts you off. And when your mitochondrial function is not in check because of your circadian rhythms, you also feel more cold because your body cannot simply tolerate the cold when your mitochondrial function is not in check. So that's kind of what led me to dig down that rabbit hole and started researching about quantum biology, quantum health, circadian health. And I started finding many, many interesting people like Dr. Jack Kruse, yourself, Jalal Khan, Sarah Kleiner, Kari Bennett, all the cool and interesting people in this space. And I've just learned so much and grown over time. And I've implemented those aspects into my own coaching because I realized that since it improved my overall health and well-being, it allowed me to sleep deeper, to wake up more refreshed, to have more energy, to have better performance in the gym, and to feel like I'm alive again, as if I've gained my life back. I realized that this is something critically important that I have to implement with all of my clients as a foundation before I even tell them that exercise, you should go and exercise, or you should do this diet plan, because I realized that if I focus on the circadian rhythms, I can amplify the effects and get faster results with my clients if I add the circadian aspect first.
Yeah, and it speaks to the hierarchy of things to address. And I think a lot of people would like to exercise, or they've been told that they need to exercise, but they're simply so energy depleted, which is reflecting poor mitochondrial function, that the prospect of exercising is difficult. But when they address the fundamental things like the circadian rhythm and particularly removing processed foods, they suddenly get that burst of energy that then allows kind of exercising to happen. Or that's what I see in my practice. The interesting thing what you said was you seem to be doing everything right. Like you were getting 8 hours sleep, you were eating a healthy diet. And what was your diet at the time?
So I was just aiming to eat like as high protein as possible, also high fat, quite minimal carbohydrates,
Mm.
because I always acknowledge that, eating carbohydrates in excess is probably not a good idea. But I wasn't aware of the fact that when you're living somewhere in a Nordic country, for example, that you should probably really consider if you should be consuming any carbohydrates at all, only when they're in season and the ones that are locally to you, because that's giving the electromagnetic information to our body what time of the year it is and what it should do based on that. So that's the way that I was eating back then, but still it wasn't allowing me to progress.
Yeah, and it that situation is commonplace when people think they're doing the right thing and they're exercising, they're getting into their eating appropriately for what they believe is correct, yet still having all these problems. So it's
Hmm.
not an uncommon situation that you were in, that a lot of people are in, and it's because there was a big missing piece in the
Hmm.
lifestyle
Yeah.
approach. So where did you go from there, and how did you what were the kind of factors that you addressed critically
Right.
to kind of improve your health?
So as soon as I started diving into it and understanding more about circadian health, I realized that blue light is a really huge issue, especially at the wrong time of the day. So we need blue light at the right time of the day, but we don't want blue light at the wrong time of the day. And that's what I wasn't aware of before, and it started to make sense to me. So the first step that I took was to buy a pair of blue light blocking glasses, because that was like the lowest hanging fruit. I went for the easiest option before I fixed my waking and sleeping cycles. I just started by blocking the blue light at night, and just by simply doing that, as soon as the sun set, I put my red blue light blockers on. I noticed that my overall quality of sleep improved so much. I felt so much more tired when it was time to go to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I already felt so much more refreshed. So I felt that, wow, my quality of life has improved just from buying a pair of glasses. It's insane. But then that only got me to a certain point, right? Because that I only addressed one small factor. So then I started thinking, okay, what else do I need to do to keep going forward and to keep on improving? Because I knew how I used to feel before in Cyprus, when I felt more optimal, and I knew how that I actually felt suboptimal. So I had this comparison to be able to tell that, okay, this is how I should be aiming to feel. But now I feel even better than both of those states before. So now I'm probably at my most optimal state, I would say. And well, what led me to after was to I bought a pair of yellow blue light blocking glasses for the daytime when I was coaching inside the gyms, because I realized that, okay, having the blue light all the way from the morning until the afternoon while I'm coaching is probably not a good idea either, because I realized that I was just getting totally fried. My brain was totally fried by the end of the day. And I thought, is it possible that my brain is fried only after 4 or 5 hours of coaching, even though they're spread out throughout the day? They're not even one after each other. And so I was thinking, this is totally not normal. And then as soon as I wore the yellow blue blockers, that helped my nervous system come back to, more of a parasympathetic state. So it was really nice to observe.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I started wearing my blue light blockers at work when I was doing some night shifts in the hospital, and the amount of difference I noticed from simply wearing a cheap pair of $35 Uvex blue blocking glasses was absolutely enormous. And it's hard to overstate the benefit. And people, when they really try it for a consistent amount of time, invariably find benefit. The it's fascinating that you mentioned how worn out or fried you felt after only 5 hours, and
Yeah.
I guess give people an idea. You mentioned why the blue light is well, we need blue light at a certain time. Just tell us
Yeah.
about what is the consequence of sitting in that gym during the day under artificial light.
Okay, so to understand this, we have to understand in general the rhythm of the sun and the day and night cycle. So, and how our body is actually meant to operate. So our body is meant to operate on a 24-hour cycle, which is called the circadian rhythm. And so we have different hormones released at different times of the day, and a lot of those hormones or most of the hormones are controlled by the light signals and the electromagnetic fields that are in our environment, like from the ground, for example. And when those are not in sync with what nature is doing, our body gets totally out of sync, because it wants to sync with nature. But when we override that mechanism by having brighter light indoors, and we isolate, for example, by not having open windows and by being underground, let's say in a gym, of course, most gyms are, they don't have windows or they're underground, then we're basically just bombarded by that midday blue light. So the around solar noon, around midday, that's when we are having the most amount of blue in the sky. And that's meant to promote alertness and a waking state. And we also have the highest amount of UVB in the solar noon. But when we are indoors, we are missing all those other beneficial frequencies of light as well, where we are missing out the infrared, we're missing out the green, we're missing out the UV. So we're missing out all the other beneficial frequencies of light, which are meant to balance the spectrum of light, which is actually perfect and harmonizing to our body. But when it's in isolation, it's a big issue, because what it's doing is just raising our cortisol all the time, the entire day. And cortisol obviously is an energy costly process. In general, making hormones is an energy costly process. So if you're making cortisol the entire day and you're not allowing energy for the other hormones to take place as well, you're just basically all the time in a sympathetic state. And that's constantly stealing electrons, which is basically energy for our system. So it's stealing our energy because we are all the time in a sympathetic state. And this is
Yeah,
why
and
it's so damaging to our system.
yeah, and I liked how you brought up the hormone issue, because what can happen, which is known as the pregnenolone steal syndrome, is when we're shunting all our energetic resources towards the production of cortisol, then that can have the downstream effect of compromising correct and appropriate production of sex hormones like progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. So it's another reason why people might find that their hormones are out of whack, as related to their suboptimal light environment. The
Absolutely.
the I guess when I think about how a lot of people work out these days, it is exactly what you said. Is that it's in a gym which has large fluoro lights or LED lights overhead, and infrequently do you see gyms with open windows or big roller doors that can let the natural light in. And
Yeah.
I think it's also quite common that people are working out in, like, I don't know if it's the same in Cyprus, but in Australia, there's chains of gyms. So, like a franchise, and they're all set
Mm-hmm.
out in a similar way. And they all have
Mm.
the artificial lighting, and they
Yeah.
usually have a TV blaring a range of, or whatever the latest propaganda is playing on the TV, trying to get people to buy stuff. But it's really, in my mind, something that is unappreciatedly harmful. And people are
Mm.
trying to do the right thing by working out, but in
Yeah.
fact, it could be having the complete or a damaging effect. And
Yeah.
the way I think about the light point that you brought up, which is that we're not getting the other forms of light, which is non-visible light like near infrared. It's almost like eating a really highly processed food diet. So
Yeah.
imagine if you
Yeah.
only ate highly refined, like hot dogs that have been incredibly processed. That's the same thing, because we're having a nutrient deficient light diet. We're not getting the infrared, and we're only getting isolated kind of blue. And so what's your approach then for your clients if we're recognizing the harm of blue light? We
Mm-hmm.
obviously want people to exercise. What's your
Mm-hmm.
approach? What's your next step for someone who wants to do circadian appropriate exercising?
Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we want to go for the lowest hanging fruit and based on the person's situation. So I always work individually, based on people's circumstances. If they only have access to a gym and they can only go and exercise, or it's their time that they are devoting for themselves when they're going to go in a gym, we're just still going to find a way to mitigate those harms. Just as I explained to you earlier about wearing the blue light blockers, for example, when they're training, I would personally advise them that they should buy a pair of yellow blue light blocking glasses, which is not going to block all the blue, but it's still going to keep them alert, and it's going to, at least minimize the amount of light going in through the eyes. I acknowledge that the skin also has photoreceptors as well, so it's advisable that people wear long clothing as well. But I understand that many people don't want to wear. It just depends how serious you want to take, the light topic into consideration. But in my opinion, is extremely serious because it controls everything else, all the hormones, the recovery, the performance, and everything like this. And when we are in an indoor environment, basically, we are just constantly frying the system. And the issue is that the majority of people anyway are spending at least 90% of their time indoors. So by taking your exercise and movement outside, it's an opportunity to be outside, right? It's another excuse to be outside, potentially grounded, depending on your area, if you've got grass or beach or whatever, or your own garden. And you can do it under the full spectrum light, even on a cloudy day, because the light is still there. Even if it's cold outside, you can still exercise. You just have to wear more clothes, you know. So of course, sometimes when it's snowing, you have to, you know, do like what I'm doing in my house. You know, I'm just mitigating my indoor light environment. I have my windows open, and I have my home gym set up in a circadian appropriate lighting, which is not going to cause me harm when I'm exercising. Because when we have blue light and non-native EMFs while we are exercising, why is it a big issue? The reason is that we are losing electrons while we are, you know, when we are trying to do something physically taxing at the same time, which is also requiring energy. So our performance is constantly going down, because we're not only using energy for the training, but we're also using energy just to survive, just to be in that environment. And so by simply switching the environment that we're in, by going outdoors, instead of losing electrons, which is a form of energy, we're actually gaining electrons. So it's pretty insane that actually we are not only, you know, we're doing more good like all the time, and the fact that we're moving anyway, we're generating electrons through piezoelectricity through the movement of our body as well. So we want to make sure that we are outside as much as we can with our movement. And how I work normally with my clients is so that I advise them to build a home gym, because that's one of the greatest investments that they could do. Let's say it costs you $1,000 to build a home gym, and a gym membership is $500 per year. In 2 years, it will have been paid off, your home gym. I know it's maybe a big upfront investment for some individuals, but once you do it, then you have it in your home where you can control your lighting, you can control your electromagnetic field environment if you cannot train outside. Because, for example, you might not want to keep your gym equipment outdoors if it's going to get rusty, or if, you know, if it's snowing, for example, then it's probably dangerous to use weights outside. Then you probably need to use it inside, but at least you're controlling your own environment, your own little bubble. So you're creating your own world where you can create healthy circadian friendly training.
Yeah, very, very good advice. People these days are wearing Apple Watches, they're wearing Fitbits, they're wearing AirPods. Talk to us about why this might be harmful, especially in the context of exercising.
Okay, so I will start by saying that in general, why I don't personally wear, let's say, a fitness tracker is for the reason being is that, first of all, it makes you out of tune or out of sync with your body. You want to be more in sync with your body, and to acknowledge when is your heart rate elevating, when is your heart rate, decreasing, like how do you feel, and more listen to your body rather trying to strive for numbers. Of course, I understand it's a good way to measure your progress or your performance in a non-biased way if you don't look at it in the training. The whole idea is that you wear it and you forget about it, not that you keep on staring at it all the time. So if you want to have good trainings in general, you need your focus to be there in the training. You don't want to be focusing on other things like your phone or your gadgets. And so not only that, but then we also have a lot of electromagnetic fields which are produced by those devices to connect to our cell phone. And especially when those are not put on airplane mode, especially the earphones, which you cannot put on airplane mode because that's how they connect wirelessly. It's through microwave radiation, and microwave radiation is extremely harmful, especially over long periods of time. It's not so much that it all depends on the duration and the intensity. So that's how it works with the non-native electromagnetic fields. The more time we're exposed to the non-native electromagnetic fields, the more harm they can cause us, because it's all about how close we are to it and the duration. So it has a compounding effect. And what are we doing also the rest of the day? So for example, if I wear for 1 hour AirPods, but then the rest of the day, I don't use my phone at all, I'm outside grounded, then that's way better than using your AirPods and the whole day using your phone and then using your laptop and then going home and watching TV and never grounding and never being outdoors. So what's happening there is that you're just constantly bombarding your system, frying your system, and stealing energy from your body, and you're making your body in a sympathetic state. So we are constricting the body. So this is why it's not ideal to wear wireless earphones or to wear fitness trackers, because those are actually taking away from us instead of giving to us. So of course, it's better to use wired earphones if you want to wear earphones.
Yeah, and Dr. Jack Cruz explains to people the harm of non-native EMF in terms of a bit of an argument ad extremum or kind of embellished example. But what happens when you put a steak in a microwave?
Yeah.
It becomes it becomes pretty quickly leathery and tough. So you can imagine that when you're in a blue lit gym and they've probably got Wi-Fi going on not far from wherever you're working out, and then you've also got the headphones and the Fitbit and the Apple Watch on. You're like you're microwaving yourself, and then you're in a bigger microwave. It's like double
Yeah.
microwaving. um, and then you can imagine like when someone goes, they say they do it at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they're getting that blue light signal very very early when the body's expecting red, it's expecting infrared, it's
Hmm.
expecting maybe a bit of UVA a bit earlier in the morning, but it's only getting blue. And then that
Yeah.
person goes to work in a cubicle, and
Mm.
continues the artificial light exposure and Wi-Fi exposure, and then kind of wonders why their hair's going grey at the age of 30. So
Mm.
it's like a hidden damage that people really aren't appreciating. So I love it
Hmm.
how you really help to frame these harms and then kind of get people back into a natural environment. Because I mean, I had this conversation with Scott Zimmerman on an earlier podcast. It's like we can use all these fancy terms and give people the kind of minutiae of the quantum level effect of the harm they're doing, but essentially the
Yeah.
job that you're helping people with, Andreas and I am, is simply just getting back into the environment where we
Yeah.
evolved in. So
Yes.
so so what
Evolutionary.
exactly? So what else do you like to do from a movement point of view? What's your approach that you like to help people with?
Mhm. So I also like to give people tools so they can use their own body as a form of a gym. So they can train anywhere, outdoors or indoors, but ideally outdoors. That's the whole idea where I've built these mobility workouts where people can use their body to improve their mobility and get a really good workout out of it at the same time. And so that they can take their body anywhere, no matter where they are, no matter if they're on vacation or if they're in their office or if they are outside of their office, on the grass during their lunch break, whatever they want to do, wherever they can fit it into their lifestyle so they can get some movement in. And that's what I help people with. And that's the whole idea, that we move the body in a holistic manner, because doing weight training is not ideal either, because weight training, what we are doing, if we are training in a very linear way, in an up and down way, we want to be focusing a lot on rotation. We want to be moving the body in more dynamic ways and lengthening the tissues while strengthening the tissues. And that's what helps us improve our mobility as well. I'm not saying that weight training doesn't improve the mobility, but you just have to know how to do it right. If you are not doing full range of motion in the exercises, if you're not really feeling the stretch on specific exercises, you're probably not gaining the mobility that you're aiming for. This is why I designed these mobility workouts, because they are less threatening to the brain, because when we are under load, our system is more afraid. So it's more easy to try and take the body to extremes with the body weight rather than using weights.
Yeah, and I think about a range of kind of approaches when I advise people to exercise. But body weight is a key aspect of that, because if you think about something like a push up or a pull up, it's a compound exercise. It's very
Mm-hmm.
intuitive and it's very kind of it's simple. So other
Yeah.
than those real basics, what are some examples of exercise that you recommend?
You mean in terms of names of exercises?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's a bit hard to give names, because without showing or explaining, in extreme detail. But some things that I do like to focus on are a little bit like Edo portal style movement, or animal flow style movement, or
Mm.
freestyle. So it looks a bit like breakdancing, but with more control, more intention. So what you're doing is that you're trying to go inside of your body and you're trying to become aware of every single part of your body as you're moving. This is also how we help ourselves eliminate and prevent injuries, is because we're starting to listen to our body and become more in tune. And so by connecting our hands and our feet on the ground, we are also improving our proprioception, which means is the information from our environment. So that's giving us more information of what is gravity like on Earth. This is how I'm supposed to respond. So it makes me more badass against gravity, basically.
Yeah, and the other advantage that we can touch on now in terms of working out outside is grounding,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something that you're not going to be able to get if we're wearing gym shoes in a gym. So, how do you think about grounding and in terms of working out and maybe how it might be aiding in recovery as well?
So, as we mentioned previously, that when we are outside, we are gaining more electrons than we are losing. So, the outdoor environment is naturally an electron-rich environment. Nature never makes mistakes. So, when we are outdoors, we are actually meant to thrive. When we come indoors, it's a suboptimal environment unless we try and mitigate as much as we can. So, we at least we are at a neutral state, but we can never be in a positive state, just like when we are outdoors. So when we are indoors, we just need to try and prevent the harms. And when we are outdoors, we are just naturally getting all the benefits without even trying. And that's the beautiful thing of nature. Only if we live by nature's laws. So if we are wearing shoes, that's not going to do us any good, right? Because we are not going to be grounded because we are wearing rubber soles. But if we are wearing something like earth runners or leather shoes, or we are walking on the beach barefoot or on grass and so on, we are getting all those beneficial free electrons from the ground. And because the electromagnetic fields from the earth, they are super important for regulating our circadian rhythm as well, because the body doesn't like just pay attention to the light, because what is light? Light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's just the part that we can see or we can't see as well. So then also the Schumann resonance is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the circadian rhythm is also paying attention to that. And when we are indoors close to Wi-Fi routers or cell phones, other people's cell phones around us, it's confusing our body. It's thinking that, okay, what's going on? So it puts us in a state of fight and flight. When we are outdoors, automatically our nervous system is down regulated. So that means that we can actually be more calm, and that's actually more beneficial when we are moving and exercising. You would think it's the opposite, that you want to be more on the edge, more excited when you're training, but actually you want to be more calm and more relaxed, because your brain can think more clearly, you can be more focused. Because if you think about yourself in a state when you are really frightened, you feel that everything around you blurs out and you have this tunnel vision and you can't focus. You can only care about one thing, which is surviving. But if you're in a parasympathetic state, you're more receptive to your environment. You can absorb more information. Your muscles are more relaxed, which is very important for injury prevention, because when we are indoors and we are in a sympathetic state, in a fight and flight state, our body is in more of a contraction state. And when we are in a muscle contraction state, that means not only our muscles, but also our organs, right? And all the parts of our body and our brain are not receiving the oxygen, they're not receiving the blood flow that they deserve and the nutrients that they need, and also to remove the metabolic waste, which is super, super important through the lymphatic system. And so when we are outside, we are actually allowing all of that to take place. And so it's just like magic, by being outdoors, because automatically we are being more optimal with our body, and we are literally improving our performance just by simply taking our workouts outside. And not only that, we're also getting more nitric oxide because of the sun. That's helping to improve blood flow, and we are more relaxed. So if you think about a muscle which is not relaxed, it's like a sponge. So the water cannot go in the sponge, but then when the muscle relaxes, all the water can flow into the sponge. So that's basically how the body works. When you are more relaxed, all the blood can flow everywhere. But when you're more tense, from the EMFs or the blue light, from the cortisol elevation, then you're going to be more tense, and that has a big impact on your fascia or inside your body.
Yeah, and Dr. Sean O'Mara, who uses sprinting quite frequently, advises
Mm-hmm.
sprinting as part of his protocol, and I do too, in terms of helping people eliminate visceral fat and in terms of really
Mm-hmm.
high intensity
Oh yeah.
exercise. He makes the point that Homo sapiens, humans, are the only animal that needs to warm up before reaching top speed. Like you see a gazelle on the African savannah, and it doesn't.
Uh-huh.
It goes from standing still to full
Uh-huh.
sprint when it's running away from a lion in a split
Yes.
second. And
Yes.
humans are the only animal that is like, oh, hang on, I better do a couple warm up sets so I don't pull my hamstring. So I wonder how much degree that what you just talked about, which is the constant grounding, is
Uh-huh.
aiding in helping animals like that be so responsive to the need to sprint.
It's also the grounding, but also the fact that, yes, the grounding is also helping us improve the blood flow around the body. But the fact that they are constantly in a ready state is what makes all the difference. So human is the only one who has invented the chair. And now I acknowledge that we are sitting on a chair right now to do this interview, but the most ideal position would be to be in a resting squat for humans. That is the ideal resting position. Or if you are ever sitting outside in nature, don't you notice that you can't sit down comfortably somewhere? There's literally nowhere comfortable to sit down. You have to keep on moving, right? So what this does, this micro movement, this constant micro movement allows your body to remain in a ready state. So you are still in a social engagement state, in a parasympathetic state, but your body is able to switch very quickly into a sympathetic state if it needs to run away from a threat, or if you were to catch a prey, for example. But if we are sitting for a prolonged period of time, we start to create stagnation in the body, and the stagnation is starting to lead to stiffness. And then if you combine that with blue light and non-native EMFs, you have major, major stiffness. I mean, I've observed this in everyone who has any desk job, even in myself. When I have to do my social media work, let's say even if it's 1 hour and I'm sitting down, I just feel so stiff afterwards. And the first thing that I do a full on mobility routine that takes me like 1 minute, but it covers the entire body. And I just feel golden afterwards. But it just shows you that just by simply sitting and then adding the electromagnetic field and the blue light, you get even more stiff. But one thing I can tell you though, is when I'm reading a book, I do not get half as stiff versus when I'm using a computer or a phone.
Very interesting. And I want to make a comment now about the blue zones and this idea that there's certain areas in the world where there's extreme longevity. And
Mm-hmm.
in the mainstream, like in the dietary circles, there's endless debate about what people are eating and to what degree is that contributing to their longevity. And I think a high degree of animal products is key. But if we think
Yeah.
about what else these old people are doing, in terms of what you're talking about, Andreas, is that they're outside
Yeah.
all the time, and they're
Mm-hmm.
moving all the time. And I think of a lot of long lived people that I know who are in their hundreds and or late 90s and still thriving. They are always moving. They're always moving in constant motion, outside. They're doing this. They're doing that. No one is sitting down all the time.
Yeah.
And on the contrary, the most sick patients that you see that are almost kind of on the way to heaven's door in a nursing home with lots of visceral fat are just, you know, they're petrified in stone almost. They're just
Mm-hmm.
completely not moving. So
Immobile. Yeah.
immobile, exactly. And I really think that what you're talking about is a relevant and key part of that.
You know, the term use it or lose it is a very real thing, because the less you do something, like let's say, for example, raising your arms over your head, you will very soon lose that ability if you do not do it every single day. And this is why when you notice some elderly people, for example, when they've passed their 60s or 70s, they cannot raise their arm, all the way vertically. That is because they haven't been practicing those movements, and so those movement patterns. So this is why it's so critical to exercise and move the body when you can. And it's never too late to start. Even that person can actually gain that range of motion back. It's just that it's way easier to do it when it's earlier in life and maintain it, rather than have to do it when you've already lost it and gain it back. Because I have worked with individuals who have been 60 or 70 years old, and we have improved their quality of life massively, being able to allow them to do a full range squat all the way down after the grass with no knee pain, no hip pain, be able to raise their arms over their head and to be able to get up and down from the floor. All of these very important human functions. And so if we do not practice these things every day, we're definitely going to lose them.
Yeah, and talk to us about sprinting and like full exertion exercise. what's your take? When do you use it, and how? What other kinds of high intensity exercise do you like to use?
Okay, so sprinting is a fantastic exercise because it allows the entire body to be utilized during the actual movement itself. It's probably one of the most complete human movements. We are actually designed to walk, run, and sprint, which is basically to locomote, right? We start off on our hands and feet. We start by crawling. This is why I also teach a lot about crawling in my movement sessions, is because it's a very primitive pattern and we are giving more information to the brain. It makes our nervous system feel safe when we are crawling on all fours because we are getting more information from our environment. But once we've gotten really good at that, that actually allows us to become better walkers, better runners, and better sprinters. Because before you can run, you must walk. Before you can sprint, you must run. So because the body only grants you access to what it feels the most safe to. This always comes back to the brain and the safety thing. So if we want to be able to run faster, we need to be able, to sprint. We need to be able to just run slower and show the body that we can slow down. Because this is actually teaching the body that, okay, he's in control, so I can give him more. I can give him more range of motion in his legs. I can give him more power, more explosiveness. And so sprinting is a fantastic exercise also on the metabolic side of things as well, because we are using a lot of glucose from the system, and that's allowing us to deplete our glucose, and that's actually putting less stress on our insulin as well. And so then we're able to go into more of a fat burning state if our diet is primarily low carb and with high in fat and high in protein. But if we are eating very high carbohydrate, very high fat, and low protein, we are not really going to go into that fat utilization state. We're just going to use whatever is there, and there might be even some excess. So we actually want to be doing it right if we're doing it for fat loss reasons. But if we're doing it, for example, for athleticism, then that's completely different, because let's say you are metabolically healthy, you don't have a lot of visceral fat and fat on your belly area to lose, and you want to optimize your performance, then you want to eat carbohydrates seasonally and to do it strategically around your training.
Yeah, that's a maybe we'll talk about that very soon in terms of dietary strategies. But yeah, I think sprinting is fantastic as well. And like Andreas said, if you haven't sprinted before, it definitely is a great idea to build up. And I like the way that you framed that crawling kind of progression, that stepwise progression into full sprinting. And yeah, I never thought about it that way, but it does make sense that when you're crawling or using all four hands on the ground, that to me is a pretty ancestrally appropriate uh, kind of movement pattern. And if you think about mammalian evolution, I mean, we only evolved bipedalism. I mean, it's a fair while back, but if you look at our closest primate ancestors, they're very often crawling. Gorillas, chimpanzees, they're using their hands to move in a lot more than we are as
Mm-hmm.
humans. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And maybe we could talk a bit about your specific approaches to men versus women. Do you make any
Mm-hmm.
distinction about exercise advice to men compared to women?
Yes, of course. We have to always consider that men work on a 24-hour cycle in terms of the hormones, and then women work on a 28-day cycle. And we need to take that into consideration when it comes to the training, because we don't want to be pushing, when we're leading up to the period and also afterwards as well, because we want to allow the body to restore and to recover, because it's going through a very energy costly process when we are losing blood and so on. And we have to make sure that we are taking it a little bit more easy. And this is why my mobility workouts are a perfect way, because we can tune them in a way that we don't need to be taxing the nervous system so much, because with the body weight, you don't. But also you can do that with weights too. Of course, you don't have to just go all out on the weights. You just have to be a bit more wise. But with weights, it's more easy to go overboard and to really push yourself. Whereas with body weight, you can, pace yourself more and be a bit more in tune with your body. So with guys, it's we have like an appropriate time of the day to train. The same for ladies as well. But for the ladies, we have to consider which part of their cycle they're in to know when we can actually push and when it's time to back off.
Yeah, great. I love that distinction and that nuance. and recognizing that there is a cyclical nature to femininity, and respecting that with regard to exercise, diet, cold exposure, and what might be appropriate at one part of the cycle is might definitely not be appropriate at another part of the cycle. So I
Hmm.
really like that. For women, do you have any specific recommendations? I mean, I like yoga. I think that
Hmm.
yoga is great for both men and women, but
Hmm.
particularly perhaps leading up to the period, something like a mobility and yoga is something that I really like to recommend.
Yes, that's for sure one of the best ways. Just in general, moving, walking, swimming, even like a light jog is fine as long as you're not straining. Anything that you're not straining yourself and you actually feel that you're not putting yourself in this fight and flight state is the most ideal thing to do. So even like a light cycling session, anything that would be endurance, for example, as long as it's not overly taxing, can be good. But holistic movement, moving on all fours and being, in tune with your body, foam rolling, doing saunas, massage guns, all the stuff that's basically self-care things. Those are the most ideal things for ladies to incorporate before and after their period, so that they can restore themselves and to also prepare themselves.
Yeah, great advice. Let's talk a bit about cold exposure, because
Hmm.
you think about how professional athletes use cold, and after a big game of professional rugby, you'll find the athletes in an ice bath after
Hmm.
they've had a massive game. What's your
Hmm.
take on cold exposure, and how do you think that people can most benefit from using it?
So cold exposure has to be done wisely, and we have to consider the exactly as you said the time of the day that we're doing it. But it also depends what your aim is out of doing it. So some people might be doing it more from the just trying to improve their metabolic function, to try and improve their leptin sensitivity, and to try and become healthier. And some individuals are doing it just to try and improve their recovery, to improve their performance, and so on. And if you're trying to do it to improve your performance and to allow you to be able to be ready for the next day, for example, let's say you are playing football, American football, and you have two games back to back, Saturday and Sunday, then of course doing it, as much as you can during those 2 days, it's okay to do, because you're actually allowing your body to be in, ready faster, and you don't get as sore. But if you're trying to build muscle, it's more ideal to, postpone it a couple of hours later, or even on your rest days, to do ice baths, so because it does decrease like blood flow, it does decrease inflammation, and inflammation is required for the recovery process, because we do need inflammation, but just in the right time. So when we are exercising, we are breaking down things. And this is why I like the mobility workouts, is because if you take them more easy, you don't break down so much muscle. But the more you push yourself, the more muscle you can break down. And so when you break down more muscle, obviously that's going to lead to rebuilding, and that takes a lot of energy from the body. But then you also need the inflammatory process to take place to be able to aid that recovery.
Yes, great advice. And these are cold is a stressor, just like deliberate
Yes.
sun exposure, just like exercise itself. These are all what are known as hormetic stresses, which is temporary, intermittent amount of stress that we put our bodies under that then allow us to compensate and grow stronger and become healthier. So, yeah, I really think that your approach of being specific about our intent of why we're using the cold and how we're using it is great advice. Let's talk about diet quickly, because you mentioned earlier in the podcast that what might be appropriate at the Finnish northern latitude in terms of our dietary carbohydrate intake is not going to be the same for someone at a equatorial latitude, and I think it's not going to be the same for someone who has metabolic disease or leptin or insulin resistance. So
Yes.
you talk to us about the dietary advice that you give to a lot of your clients, maybe based on those nuances.
So someone, let's say, who is living at a higher latitude, will naturally in their environment will not have so many vegetables and fruits growing. So that indicates to us immediately that, okay, maybe I should consider not eating those things, because even though they are available in the supermarket or even in the freezer section, which has been shipped from, Brazil, Costa Rica, and so on, then that doesn't mean that you should be eating that food, because it's creating a circadian mismatch at the time of the year, because we don't have only like a 24-hour circadian rhythm. We have also like a yearly circadian rhythm, a seasonal circadian rhythm. So our body can tell what time of the year it is and how it should change its processes internally. And so basically when you are living at a higher latitude, you cannot tolerate so many carbohydrate rich foods, and you should be aiming for more fat and high protein foods, which are basically animal foods. Those are the best sources and the most bioavailable. Whereas if you are living closer to the equator, you have an abundant amount of fruits and vegetables. But if you are metabolically unhealthy and you need to fix your leptin and your insulin, and you have high blood glucose, then for sure you should probably not consume, high carbohydrates, even if you're living on the equator, because even this is one thing that I noticed with a lot of individuals, for example, here in Cyprus, is that even though they live in Cyprus, it's as if they are living in a Nordic country. Do you know why?
Why?
Because they are
Oh,
living
because they,
indoors.
yeah, they're living indoors. They're wearing sunglasses. They're covering up from the sun. They're essentially simulating a low UV environment.
Exactly. Exactly. And then basically what that means is that their body is like completely confused, and completely mismatched. And that's basically allowing our body to create more inflammation inside the body, because it's completely confused. We are consuming a lot of carbohydrates, even though our body thinks we're, living at a higher latitude, and, everything is out of sync. So everything is not working as it should. So we also, when we're living closer to the equator, we also have a higher UV environment, as you mentioned. And this is actually allowing us to detoxify more and to sweat more. And this is actually allowing us to get rid of a heavy metal called deuterium, which is clogging our mitochondria. Deuterium is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a bad thing in excess, and especially in individuals who are metabolically unhealthy. And the more deuterium we deplete, the more we can intake, but the more we have accumulated inside our system through eating fruits and vegetables, because it's primarily found in coconuts, cacao, fruits, vegetables. Those are like the highest sources, and probably some supplements as well, which we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think that framing it for the listener is the amount of carbohydrate for someone that's insulin and leptin sensitive, metabolically healthy, which is not a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, but for those who are, the amount of carbohydrates you can tolerate is going to be commensurate with the ultraviolet light environment that you're existing in. And as
Yep.
Andreas has mentioned, is the reason why that is the case is because ultraviolet light is what permits fruits and vegetables to grow.
Yep.
And it's if we I guess maybe summarize what we're talking about in this past hour is that we're all about creating coherence. It's creating coherence between your body and your environment, whether that is being out in the sunlight to sync the body up with the circadian signal for that particular time of day, whether it's grounding to give your body a geographical point of orientation and coherence for the exact latitude that you're at, or it's giving a coherent signal through the consumption of food that is growing at that location. It's so simple it's complicated, I think, um, for a lot of people. And I heard Dr. Jack Cruz mentioned once in a recent podcast is humanity is unable to survive above the 60th latitude, and one of the reasons is because or can't thrive above that latitude is because there's not
Yeah.
a lot of photosynthesis going on. But what happens is when people are inside or they're wearing clothing, they're wearing sunglasses, they're not getting out. They're essentially simulating a low UV environment.
Yeah.
So, so as you say, if you're eating a carb or seed oil rich diet while simulating a low UV environment, that is
Mm-hmm.
a massive recipe for developing insulin leptin resistance and packing on the visceral fat.
Yeah, it's going to cause chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation, low grade, especially when it goes unnoticed, is like, one of the root causes of all Neolithic diseases. It's when we have this micro inflammation in the body, then, we get like things like plaque buildup and so on in our cardiovascular systems, because our body is trying to protect us from the inflammation. So this is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to try and be in sync with the environment as much as we can, because by simply just going outside and waking up with the sunrise, going to bed with the sunset, or if we're not going to bed with the sunset, at least wearing red blue light blockers at night and using red light bulbs in the home to make the body think that it's still sunset until we decide to go to bed, then that's the way, for the body to be healthy, because we are aligning ourselves with nature. When we just observe nature and we observe all the animals, they're constantly grounded, right? They are always outside. And if they are not in the sun, they're in the shade because they're smart. We are the only ones who put on sunscreens, put on sunglasses, and think that we can spend 10 hours in the sun just because we've applied those things on our body. We're just defying the laws of nature. Even animals are so clever that when they get enough sun, they go in the shade, but they're still receiving the full spectrum light because they're just simply in the shade. They're not indoors.
Yeah, they're great points, and it's a process of understanding all these pieces. But again, it just comes back to what's ancestral, what's natural, what's how do we live in accordance with Mother Nature's rules. And I
Yeah.
think that the to give an asset or a facet about diet, and we can talk quickly about carnivore, because I'm sure that a lot of people or some of your clients are using a carnivore type diet. So when have you found benefit for people using carnivore? I guess we've already touched on it a little bit, but maybe if you
Mm-hmm.
could just spell it out again for the listener.
Mm-hmm. So anybody who is metabolically unhealthy, anybody who is not insulin sensitive and is not is leptin resistant, we definitely have to incorporate more of a zero to low carb diet, because that's allowing our body to utilize everything that is available there, and it's allowing to sync the body in accordance with nature. So basically, when we eat a high fat diet, what we are doing, we're actually improving our mitochondrial function. And the mitochondria are the ones that are creating the energy inside the system. And when we are able to generate more energy, we're able to heal ourselves, because if we don't have energy, we can't repair, we can't have performance, we can't have health, we can't have vitality. Because what is vitality? Vitality is literally to have an excess of energy than what you actually need, because that means that you have creativity, enthusiasm, you're outgoing, you're all of those things that what nature does to you. It allows you to optimize your mitochondrial function without even trying. So anybody who has those metabolic conditions for sure needs to consider using a carnivore style diet. And because those nutrients are the most bioavailable as well, and the least taxing on the gut as well, because the more foods we are putting in our system, the more taxed our gut becomes. And that's how we get all the bloating and leaky gut issues, especially if people have dysregulated circadian rhythms. They are more likely to have leaky gut too. And if you are eating foods which have phytonutrients, which are defense chemicals uh, in plants, and different things like this that are going to irritate the gut, then what's going to happen is when you eat those are going to enter the bloodstream because of the leaky gut, and it's going to cause inflammation. And if you're doing that over a prolonged period of time and you start to gain weight, even though you're supposedly eating right, let's say you're already eating vegetables and high protein and high fat, but you're still gaining fat, then it might be something to consider, that that you need to actually heal the gut by fixing first the circadian rhythm, and then secondly the diet.
Amazing, Andreas. I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is the mind blowing implication, which kind of colors in and adds so much nuance to the diet wars, which is if we are unable, or if we're gaining weight, if we're feeling sick despite again what we think is a healthy diet, it is the reality is that there's a circadian regulation of enterocyte of gut lining and
Mm-hmm.
turnover, and the contributing factor or key contributing factor to leaky gut or is a disrupted circadian rhythm. So people might otherwise be able to tolerate a small amount of plant foods and still thrive if their circadian rhythm were intact, which I think is a point that you've made and I make that not many people are coming to. So the other implication I think that is worth spelling out is that once we are healed from a gut point of view, from a leptin insulin resistance point of view, from a visceral fat point of view, to me, it doesn't. We don't need to restrict ourselves from locally grown seasonal carbohydrates if we're healthy and it's appropriate to that season. And
Yeah.
it's my opinion. I don't know what you. I'll get your opinion on this, but it was my opinion that I think the one reason why Dr. Paul Saldino stopped recommending strict carnivore diet was because it stopped working for him because he was trying to maintain that strict zero carb approach at a very equatorial latitude. And
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, if you are living on the equator and you are training a lot as well, and you're doing a carnivore diet, you're for sure going to deplete your body very quickly of all its, electrolytes and all its sources, of energy. And you are going to need more electrolytes to stay hydrated, for sure. And of course, when we eat carbohydrate-rich foods, that holds on to more water inside the body. So that allows more cellular hydration, even though that's not the most ideal water, because our body makes its own water. The mitochondria make the most pristine water that exists, but that's primarily through a ketogenic style diet. But when we eat carbohydrate rich foods, then we are not able to make as much of that water as well. So I guess that eating fruits in the right context is very important. So, and if it's perfect for your body. So if you're metabolically healthy, if you don't carry excess fat, if you're leptin sensitive, if your circadian rhythms are in check, and if you feel that you are lacking the energy in your training and with your performance, and your sleep is disrupted because your cortisol is too high, then it's probably beneficial for you to incorporate some carbohydrates. But again, it should be in not in excess. It should be kept to a minimum, because we should only supply the body with carbohydrates when it actually needs it, not because we think it needs it. So this is again coming back to trying to listen to our body, that how am I feeling today? Do I have improved energy levels after eating a papaya, for example? But eating a papaya every day might not be the ideal thing. So this is something that you need to experiment with. So for example, you might try 1 week eating a papaya every day, but that's the only carb that you eat, and you eat just a carnivore the rest of the diet. And then the next week, you experiment by eating it every other day and observe how you feel. And maybe minimizing the portion size to half a papaya and then eating every day, and finding that amount which is perfect for your body, because everybody's so bio individual and everyone's metabolisms are different. We all carry different amounts of muscle mass, and the closer you are to the equator, the more carbohydrates you can handle. And so this is all things that we need to consider when thinking about the amount of carbohydrates that we should be eating. And the carbs that we should be eating are the things that really only existed more than 100 years ago. Because if we are eating something like pasta or wheat or pizza, all this processed stuff, this which didn't exist, this is going to cause havoc and chaos on our system. And that's honestly never good, no matter what time of the year, because it just didn't exist in nature.
yes, exactly. And the I think the message is really nuanced, and but you're really laying it out quite clearly, Andreas, which is you might be able to include some whole food carbohydrates if it's seasonally appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're metabolically healthy, and that might look like half a papaya twice a week, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
if you've got or you've got much less UV light or healthy sunlight in the week leading up to it, you don't eat the papaya. Or if you do eat it, it's you're making sure you're outside, in close to solar noon. So
Yeah.
these are all the nuances that we like to make, that I think get people closer to what is going to be ideal for them. So amazing stuff. I really have enjoyed this conversation, Andreas. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to tell the audience?
The only thing that we didn't cover was about the injury side of things, the risk of injury when training indoors versus training outside. So it's not so much about being indoors, but it's more about what is the environment created indoors, right? So when we are indoors, we are more likely to create an incoherent environment, which is not circadian appropriate. And we are surrounded by other people's electromagnetic fields, even if we are not carrying a cell phone on us, even if we are not wearing smartwatches or earphones, we're surrounded by other people's phones and earbuds, and we have the fluorescent lights overhead and so on. And what this does is that it dehydrates the body, just as you mentioned previously, like a microwave. And when we dehydrate the body, we put our body at greater risk for injury because our body is primarily made out of water. And especially when we look at the fascia, like how it's, mainly made out of water, which is this collagenous, tendinous style structure in the body, like a spider web. If that's dehydrated, that is a more greater risk at rupturing, for the reason being that it's less pliable, because anything that is more dry is not going to flex or be able to stretch as far. But something that is more hydrated is going to less likely have a damage. And so by being outdoors, we're actually stimulating cellular hydration through the light and through the grounding, through the electromagnetic fields of the ground and all the positive electrons, the negative electrons that we're getting from the ground as well. So this is why it's so important to try and consider taking our exercise outdoors if we can, because it's another reason to be outside, because too much of us are spending time indoors more than we actually want to, because we are going from home, driving in the car, getting out of the car, going into the office, out of the office to the store. All of these places are indoors, and the system has been designed in a way where we are literally stuck indoors. So that was my closing thought, that we should try and consider to be outside as much as we can.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think about the muscle beach athletes, back in, was it the 1970s on Venice Beach in California, these
Yeah.
guys were working out outdoors, and their physiques, in classical bodybuilding, their physiques are still looked upon as some of the best. The other aspect to this, and maybe we'll really just quickly touch on this, is I remember hearing a case on Twitter of a gentleman who was a strict carnivore. I'm not sure for how long. There wasn't a lot of kind of information around the case, but he was a strict carnivore, and he had a acute myocardial infarction. He had an LAD stenosis, so-called widowmaker, despite being on a very low insulin provoking diet, which is
Yeah.
carnivore. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason why he found out about this attack is because he went into atrial fibrillation, which is a irregular heart rhythm, and it was
Mm-hmm.
detected on his Apple Watch. And in
Mm-hmm.
his photo, he was in a gym. He was I believe he was indoors in a gym. So to
Yeah.
me, I'm thinking, okay, so what is the context of which someone might have such a severe problem, like develop have an AMI and a coronary artery occlusion, despite having a low insulin um, environment, which is,
Yeah.
if we think about endothelial dysfunction as kind of the
Mm.
underlying reason why we're developing blood clots in our arterial system, then
Yeah.
it kind of the circadian and quantum perspective that you've just given us over the last hour really kind of makes sense to me in terms of why that guy would have perhaps developed this problem. And one, he's got his Apple Watch on, he's exposed to non-native EMFs, he'd be in a gym working out under blue light, he would not be grounded. And we know, we haven't mentioned in this interview, but grounding has an incredible ability to increase the zeta potential of your red blood cells and reduce coagulability. So that's a kind of interesting thought experiment at n equals one, but it to me makes logical and rational sense why not respecting our evolved natural light environment could lead to a problem, like a severe cardiac problem like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know that it's all about the accumulative effect that we need to look at. So for example, it depends also what is this guy doing as a job, and what is he doing with the rest of his time outside of the gym? Because if you are, let's say, working in an office, and in your home you've got the Wi-Fi always on, even when you sleep, so you're bombarded constantly by the EMFs, and you're constantly putting your body in a sympathetic state, even though you're not aware of it. And then you're going to train in a blue light gym with putting your body under more load, under more stress. You are more likely to, be presented with these kind of problems if your body is under more load. So the greater the load it's under, the more likely we are to, be presented with something that we don't want to be presented with.
Yes, and in this guy's case, he didn't have any visceral fat, and he did look, at least superficially, very healthy. And Dr. Jack Cruz likes to particularly make the point that we can be deceived by physical appearance, and
Yeah.
it's no protection to have an Adonis type physique if that physique is in the context of working out indoors, and I guess this idea of burying your mitochondrial density in the muscles as
Mm.
opposed to in the brain and in the heart.
Stealing electrons from where it's required
Mm.
most. So if your body is just running out of electrons, and you're just constantly getting them stolen from your environment, and then in exercise anyway, you're using electrons to generate ATP, and so then you're just gonna take it away from where it's required the most, which is your brain and your heart. And one thing that we actually didn't talk about was the melanin topic, and that's why also training outdoors is so beneficial, because it's another way for us to build our melanin and to absorb actually electrons from the sun. So it's another fantastic reason to be outside.
Yes, fantastic. Well, Andreas, thank you so much for coming on. I will. Can you give patients or people an idea about where they can find you and how they can get in touch with you if they want to work with you, and maybe some of your free content?
Okay, thank you so much. So you can find me on Instagram at Andreas_David_Christou. And you can also find my website at www.mobility-fitness.com. And then on there is a contact form. You can reach out to me by email if you wish to work with me one-on-one. I offer nutrition coaching, which is circadian appropriate and seasonally appropriate, ancestrally appropriate, and also lifestyle optimization. So to consider all the other aspects of life which we didn't touch upon, like the other environmental stressors, endocrine disruptors, all the things in the home that could be causing havoc and stress and inflammation on our system, because all of these things, they can have a massive impact on our recovery process, our sleep, our performance, and our health and vitality. So I like to use a holistic approach when it comes to moving and exercise, but also the nutrition side of things as well. And also those mobility workouts that we talked about, you can find them on my website.
Yes, and if you follow Andreas on Instagram, he always has some fantastic video exercises, so you can watch him doing these type of exercises that we talked about just on Instagram. So amazing that I think we've covered a whole bunch of very interesting and valuable topics, and really actionable advice for people. So thanks, Andreas. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.